Hi, welcome back to Kalike. It's been a long time I posted a video. I apologize for that. There was a reason I couldn't post some videos. So, in continuation of what we have been doing in electrostatics, let's continue and revise what we learned in my previous session in electrostatics. We spoke all about Coulomb's law of force of attraction or repulsion. So, what does Coulomb's law in general state? Coulomb's law states that the force of attraction or repulsion between any two charges assumed to be kept in vacuum or in free space is directly proportional to the magnitude of the two charges, product of the magnitude of the two charges, and inversely proportional to the square of the distance of separation between the two charges and acts in the direction of the force. So this is really very important. You have to specify the magnitude as well as the direction, because we are talking about a force acting between any two charges in a given medium. So we do not assume any medium here. We assume the charges to be kept in vacuum, which is an ideal situation, or in free space, which is close to vacuum, assuming that there are hardly any molecules interfering between the two charges that are placed in any given medium, right? So I will re-explain it, and then we'll do a little bit more. We'll start understanding more about this, what happens if you keep it in another medium other than free space or vacuum. What happens to the force between these two charges? We'll start understanding this, and then I'll introduce another concept in my next session. So this session is absolutely dedicated to understanding the characteristic or the ability of a particular medium in which the charges are placed, and how does this characteristic or the ability of the medium actually reduces the force between the two charges, what really happens at an atomic level, right? So let's get started with Coulomb's law. So what does Coulomb's law state? Coulomb's law, as we already know, states that the force of attraction or repulsion, so this could be either the force of attraction, let me state it so that it gets registered with you, and it becomes really easy to state Coulomb's law no matter whenever, whatever time you are asked. Even in your sleep you should be able to recite it, because if you understand the concept really well, it is absolutely easy to state this law. So we are talking about a force. What kind of force? We are talking about the force of attraction or repulsion, or in general force. You can also just say that the force between what? Force between any two charges, right? Force between, are they just charges? Are we only talking about any charge for that matter? No. Do you remember we defined something called point charge in our last session? So what do you mean by a point charge? Point charge, we call a charge as a point charge. Okay, you call any charge as a point charge. Imagine that there is a charge Q placed at some point on the board. So randomly, if I pick someone and I ask where exactly is the charge placed on the board, then how do you really tell me what is the position of that charge? You have to define something called position vector. How do you define a position vector? A position vector can be defined if you write the coordinate axis. What do you mean by coordinate axis? Coordinate axis means you define the x-axis, you also define the y-axis with respect to the charge. So let's write the coordinate axis. So let's call this as the y-axis, which is the positive y-axis, and this is your positive x-axis, and this is the origin O. Now with respect to this, you start dividing it on a particular scale. Suppose it is at a distance 1.5 and 2. So this is 1 and this is 2 and this is 3, and this is, let's say, 0, this is 1. So what will be the position of this? X, what is the value of x1 comma y1? The value of x and y is, x is, this must be 1.5, so it is situated at 1.5, whatever centimeter. I mean, if you have taken this, if this is in centimeter scale, then it is at situated 1.5 centimeters above the x-axis and 1 centimeter beside the y-axis. So this becomes your coordinate axis, or in general you refer to with, if you are doing it with a vector, we define a vector r, where vector r is given using these coordinates x into I cap, where I tells you the direction, x gives you the value. I is a unit vector saying that this is pointing in the direction of the x-axis. So this is your unit vector pointing in the direction of the x-axis, and this is your unit vector pointing in the direction, we define it as j, in the direction of y-axis. Unit vector is any vector which has a magnitude 1 for all practical reasons, because we do not want it to alter the magnitude of the vector as such, but we are saying that it points in a particular direction. Anything that points in the x direction, such unit vectors are denoted by I. Anything that points in the y direction, we call such unit vectors by j, and anything that points in the z direction, we call such vectors, unit vectors, as k unit vector. We'll learn more about it once I take up the next chapter in mechanics from class 11. I mean, class 11 you must have read. In my videos, I've not covered it yet. So, I mean, when I start, I'll definitely explain it in very much detail so that it becomes really clear, because I've seen a lot of students in my career where, they really find these scalars and vectors, very exhausting to understand, because they can't really perceive what they mean. I mean, the perception doesn't happen in their mind, and they feel it is really challenging solving the numericals and understanding and perceiving what are we really seeing. So it is very mathematical. We are only saying it has a particular magnitude 1. So it doesn't alter the value of x, the coordinate x. It doesn't alter the value that it is at a distance of 1 centimeters, 1.5 centimeters from the x-axis, but it tells me it is pointing in the direction of x-axis. So this vector can be, it's like the parallelogram law also. So you have one vector pointing in the y direction, one vector pointing in the x direction, and the resultant vector is in this direction. So the resultant vector is a combination of the vector pointing in the x direction and a combination of the vector pointing in the y direction, the algebraic sum of this vector. So you just write it as y j cap, right? So this is how you define position vector. So the whole point of introducing this here is I wanted to bring to your notice that we are basically referring to something called point charges. So why do I call it as a point charge? I can refer to this charge q as a point charge if the size or the magnitude of the charge is very much negligible compared to the distance from the origin or from the x and the y axis. So if r is greater than the magnitude of the charge, if you convert them into the same units, I mean, if you then in comparison, if the distance is greater than the charge, the magnitude of the charge itself, you treat such charges as point charges. And remember, for all practical purposes and for all numerical purposes, in ideal cases, we assume all the charges interacting with each other in electrostatics, where we tend to apply the Coulombian force of attraction or repulsion. We treat them as point charges only, assuming that the distance of separation between any two charges is greater compared to the magnitude of the charges themselves, or any charge placed at any point, we assume that its magnitude is very much less compared to the distance from the origin of the coordinate axis. So it is as simple as that. I hope that part is clear, because these things should be clear. If your fundamentals are clear, it really becomes super easy and you start really enjoying solving electrostatics numericals. You no more fear to take up a numerical, because the moment you see all these directions, the moment you see point charges, and you don't specifically, and the moment trigonometry also comes into place, you start defining angles, sine theta, tan theta, cos theta, and all of that. It becomes really scary. So it is essential that you understand the fundamentals really, 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 really well. That is why in all my classes, I always tell you that if you take care of your fundamentals in physics, then physics and its fundamentals will certainly take care of whatever you do. All your calculations will go in the right direction, and you might not end up making a mistake. Okay. So it's all about, hooking on to the fundamentals, right? So let's get back to what we were doing. So the force between any two point charges, right? Any two point charges. So this is something very important. Okay, it is not just we define it for a certain purpose, we define it for a reason. You cannot have a bigger charge where the distance of separation between the charges is very much less and the charge as such has a very greater magnitude, Coulombian force law cannot be applied there. You apply this law only when the separation is greater than compared to the magnitude of the charges. So that is why it is very much essential to define the force and say the force between, we are particularly stating this law for any 2-point charges, and we are trying to explain how this force varies between any 2-point charges. So let's consider 2-point charges. What are those 2-point charges? Obviously we call this as Q1 and Q2. You see, I just write a dot, I don't write a circle or anything, assuming it to be a point charge. Let R be the separation, okay, distance of separation between Q1 and Q2. So the force between any 2-point charges, Q1 and Q2, varies. How does it vary? It varies directly, right? Directly, so it comes in the numerator as the product, okay, product of what? Product of the magnitude of the charges. So it is not just the product of the charges. You can't just directly say product of the charges. No, that is rubbish. You are speaking in terms of physics, so every term really matters, especially when you are dealing with vectors. If you are talking about direction, you have to write it as direction. If you are talking about magnitude, you have to specify you are talking about the size of the charges or the magnitude of the charges. So it is very much essential for you to pinpoint and say that the force between these 2-point charges varies directly as the product of magnitude of the 2 charges. So product of magnitude of 2 charges. It is very, very, very much essential to write product of magnitude. Please underline this line, keep that here, register it so that you make no more mistakes whenever you have to state the law and whenever you understand. You really have to understand, because it becomes really easy to solve the numericals. So product of magnitude of the 2 charges, right? Okay. And what else does it vary as? It also varies inversely. So once I know inversely, I know something is going to come with the denominator. Varies inversely as the square of the distance between them. Okay. It varies inversely as the square of the distance between them. Right? Inversely as the square of the distance between them. Between them or between the 2 charges as such. Okay, now are we done? No, we are not done. Now we are talking about force. What is force? Is force a vector or a scalar? It's a vector. So have we spoken about the magnitude? A vector has both magnitude and direction, right? So force has both magnitude and direction. So when I say product of magnitude of charges, I've covered the magnitude of part. And also when I say varies inversely as the square of the distance of separation between them, distance is also a scalar. So I've covered this magnitude part. Have I covered the direction part? No. So it is essential that I specify in what direction does the force act. So it directly, we have to say it acts along the line joining the 2 charges. What does that mean? There is a line that is joining the 2 charges. So it acts along the line joining the 2 charges. If it is a repulsive force, it moves away from the charge. If it is an attractive force, still also it acts along the line joining the 2 charges. So that is the direction. You are specifying the direction. So that part you cannot miss, especially when you are stating the Coulomb's law or while solving any numerical using Coulomb's law, because it is essential that you not only calculate the magnitude and just leave it as such, you also specify in what direction actually the force is acting. It is very much essential. Otherwise, you lose marks on your board exams, and even in MCQs, there could be numericals where there are multiple options, same options with different directions. So unless you know how to calculate this direction, especially with vectors, you are going to end up with the wrong answer. So please make sure these directions, you are very well versed with directions, magnitude. It looks tough, it is not, trust me, it is all about practice. So what do? We write it as and acts. This is a very, very crucial statement. And acts along the line joining the 2 charges. Acts along the line joining the 2 point charges. Point charges is also very essential because they might want to trick you and give you a large charge, and you might see it does not really obey Coulomb's law because we are not talking about point charges at all. If you're talking about point charges, yes, Coulomb's law definitely applies. If you're not talking about point charges, then Coulomb's law fails, right? So this is a very crucial statement which gives you the magnitude part. This entire thing gives you the magnitude part, right? This is the magnitude part, and this sentence or the statement at the end that we write, where does that force actually act? It acts along the line joining the two charges or the 2 point charges, is the crucial part where you are stressing on it and saying that there is a particular direction to the force. What is the direction of the force? It only has to act along the line joining the charges, right? It can either act towards Q1 or act away from Q1 depending on the positive and negative charges. If the force is attractive, it will act towards Q1. If the force is repulsive, it will act away from Q1, but it will certainly act along the line joining the 2 point charges. So this is very much essential. I hope I have clarified even bit more than my previous session. I particularly wanted to restate it so that it gets registered and you do not make mistakes, especially when we pick up numericals. We'll pick up them soon in coming couple of sessions, and you will see it's really wonderful solving electrostatics problems, and you will start enjoying, and when you understand the fundamentals and how they really work and how you can play with the directions and magnitude and stuff like that. Okay, so I saw that it was out of focus. This part was out of focus where I clearly mentioned that it acts along the line joining the 2 point charges. It is essential that you specify the direction, and I hope this part is clear and visible as well. So now let us combine this definition or statement of Coulomb's law into a mathematical statement. So we spoke about the magnitude, that is force is directly proportional to the product of the magnitude of the forces, and it is inversely proportional to the distance of separation between them and acts along the line joining the two charges, right? 2 point charges to be specific. Combining these two, we can write it as it is proportional to Q1 Q2 upon R square. Now you want to remove the proportionality constant. What do? You experimentally find out some constant, and we call or refer to that constant as Coulomb's constant. So I refer to that constant as Coulomb constant. This again I have explained in the previous session, but since I have to talk about permittivity, I'll have to revisit all this so everything becomes really clear, right? So K, I've replaced alpha by equals in K into Q1 Q2 upon R square. So what is K? K is called the Coulombian constant or simply the Coulomb's constant. And what does it depend upon? Coulomb's constant is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. Okay, what is the value of 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught? It is 9 into 10 to the power of 9. Okay, you can figure out the units. We'll do that part later. We have done it in the previous session. I'll do it again. Okay, now what is epsilon naught? We spoke about this in previous class. It's a characteristic or the ability of the medium which actually either reduces the force between any two given charges. But here, in ideal situation or for all practical purposes, to simplify the numerical, we assume, or Coulomb assumed, that the charges were kept in free space, as such in vacuum, which is an ideal case. You can't really have you really remove the air out of a particular room and then you place the two charges, you try to measure the force between them. Obviously, there are no molecules to interfere between the two charges. So certainly, there is the ability of the medium to interact with the two charges actually reduces. So what I'm trying to say is, so this is charge Q1 and this is charge Q2, and you're placing them in vacuum, right? So vacuum, in other words, we can also refer to it as free space. So what do you mean by vacuum or free space? What is the number of molecules or atoms present there? So the number of molecules slash or atoms present in such an ideal case is 0. Right? It is negligible. You have literally removed, in an ideal case, you must have removed all the atoms. There are no atoms present. There is nothing in between these two. They are just separated by a distance. Absolutely nothing in between them. So no atoms to interfere, because we know any atom has its own nucleus. Nucleus has both protons and neutrons residing inside it, with electrons orbiting around the nucleus. So electrons and protons do carry negative and positive charges. So there could be chances that these charges inside the atoms, they might also start interacting with the point charges that are already placed in a particular medium. So we do not want such complications. So what did Coulomb do? He said, or he assumed that he carried out the experiment saying that these two charges were placed in a medium where there were negligible number of atoms, or such ideal case where the number of atoms in a given medium or free space, which we call as the permittivity of free space, was minimum. So it hardly there were any atoms or nuclei to really reduce the amount of force exerted by Q1 on Q2. Q1 will exert its own amount of force on Q2, and Q2 will also exert some amount of force on Q1 according to Newton's third law, right? So for every force there is certainly, and for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So when this starts pulling on Q2, Q2 also starts pulling on Q1. So one of them, if that's the repulsive force, this starts moving apart. So if R was the distance of separation initially, the next, after the force was applied, the separation will be R dash. So Q2 has, in reaction to the force, Q2 has moved away. So there is a reaction to the force. That means this has also drifted away. Although we are assuming it to be stationary, we keep it stationary, but you see that it has also drifted away in such a way that the distance has changed from R to R dash, right? So therefore he assumed that it was kept in free space. So there was nothing to interfere in between. The medium was clear, nothing in between. So you could potentially, what could happen? So imagine you are climbing a stairway, or imagine you have to go from this distance to this distance. The path is absolutely clear. There is nothing in between you. Nothing happening. Imagine you are driving a car. You have to reach a certain destination. There is absolutely no obstacle at all in your path. So what do? You reach your destination faster, right? So that is what happens. So the force, you reach at a maximum speed. You are allowed to drive at a maximum speed because there are no obstacles. Nothing is going to come in your way, right? So it is absolutely just the same way, where this absolute epsilon naught is minimum for free space or vacuum, right? When epsilon naught is minimum, this value becomes maximum, right? Is minimum for free space or vacuum. So let's replace this first. This can be written as 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by R square. So if epsilon naught is minimum, what will happen to the force? Force will be maximum. So the force exerted by Q1 on Q2 or Q2 on Q1 is maximum. They experience maximum amount of force only when kept in a medium assumed to be vacuum or space, where there are no nuclei or electrons or protons to interact with. So there is absolutely no obstacle. So we assume that it experiences maximum amount of force in a medium where it has no characteristic to really reduce the amount of force. Why? You are removing all the atoms. So you are depriving that medium of really reducing the force between any two given charges. You have removed all the atoms out of the system, out of the medium. So obviously there's nothing to interact with. So it has to directly interact with the other charge that is up there. So it exerts a force, a repulsive force. So charge displaces from its original position at a distance r to a new distance called r dash. So ideally both have moved apart, proving that it also obeys Newton's third law. For every action or for every force there is an equal and opposite force. For every action there is an equal and opposite force. So I hope this part is clear. Now we will define it for other mediums and see what happens to this permittivity. Okay, now I also have to say this is called permittivity of free space. The sound, it might sound scary because that's how the physics terms are, but it is nothing but just the ability of the medium to reduce the force. When I say ability, what do you mean? I mean, she's saying something really abstract. No, it's not abstract. When I say ability, I'm talking about there might be something else in the medium that is trying to cause trouble on Q1, because Q1 is trying to exert force on Q2 and vice versa. Q2 is also trying to exert force on Q1. There must be something else in the medium that we cannot see. What could be in the medium that we cannot see? Obviously the atoms loaded with nuclei, nuclei loaded with protons and neutrally charged neutrons, which do not really affect because neutrons are potentially have a net charge 0. So we only speak about the atoms loaded with protons and electrons. They might carry a certain charge, and so basically it doesn't only have to interact with Q2, it will have to interact with loaded number of other atoms and nuclei with their respective protons and electrons before interacting with Q2. You are unable to remove something from that medium. So what will happen? Obviously it will alter the force. So that ability of that medium where you have a number of molecules or an atom or nuclei interacting with Q1, where Q1 has to go interact with them before interacting with Q2, is what we refer to as the permittivity of a particular medium. So the term as such might seem scary, but when you understand what it really means, what it does to the force exerted by Q1 on Q2, it is absolutely simple to understand. So permittivity of free space. Okay, now let's assume the charges are placed in a medium like water. So let us try to understand and write equation for permittivity of that medium. Okay, so far we wrote we assume that the charges were placed in vacuum or free space, and we defined K to be 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, where epsilon naught was permittivity of free space. So permittivity of free space is minimum because there are hardly any atoms left in between the 2 point charges to interact with, and hence the permittivity or the ability of that medium to reduce the force between any 2 point charges reduces, and hence the force applied by Q1 on Q2 or Q2 on Q1 will be maximum because there are no interfering charges in between these 2 point charges, right? But that doesn't happen in case of any other medium, right? Let's take a medium like water. Okay, any solid medium or a liquid medium where you have enough number of atoms or nuclei to interact. In other words, there are other charged particles to interact in between these 2 charged particles. So if I take it as water, let's say you have kept 2 charges in a medium like water. So the charges are placed, there is water, imagine that there are charges. These 2 point charges Q1 and Q2, again separated by the same distance r, are placed in a medium like water. Now what does water have? Water has molecules, right? Molecules have atoms in them, many number of atoms, right? And what do these atoms have inside? So let's basically write the diagram of an atom. The atom has a nuclei inside. The nuclei has protons, right? And neutrons. Neutrons do not carry any charge, so I basically write them as 0, 0, 0. And there are electrons revolving around these nuclei, right? So negatively charged electrons will be revolving around. So there are plenty of these atoms in between. There could be 1 or 2, even if there is one, one you could ignorably, you can still ignore it. So if there are a couple more, let's say in the vicinity, obviously these atoms and molecules which are loaded with nuclei, which are also loaded with charged particles like positively charged particles like protons and negatively charged particles orbiting the nuclei containing the protons, which are negatively charged, and we refer to them as electrons, try to interact or reduce the effect of force of Q1 on Q2. So the effect of force drastically reduces when you have interfering atoms in between you, right? So if I have to, if we take the same example where you have to reach a certain destination, I start from here. If I have n number of cars, even if I have reached to reach a small destination, I will end up applying a lot of force. So every time I will have to stop my car, or if I'm walking, I'll have to stop because I'll have to walk through the crowd. I'll have to walk through these obstacles. So the force has to act through these obstacles. It'll have to interact with these obstacles first before reaching the destination. What is the destination? The destination for Q1 is Q2. The destination for Q2 is Q1. So basically, in between these two destinations, or for Q1 to reach its destination, it will have to deal with a lot of obstacles like these atoms loaded with electrons and protons, trying to influence or trying to alter the force. So it will end up, what will happen, you will end up spending, this charge will end up spending some energy in terms of force. So it starts spending some force. It will have to spend some amount of its force in interacting with these charged particles existing between the two charges, especially if you are keeping those charges in a medium other than vacuum or free space. So why do we call it free space and vacuum the same? Because I'll tell you the reason. Now, if you go higher above the atmosphere, you see that it is really void. There is nothing. There are no molecules. And go above ionosphere, you see that it is absolute vacuum. There are literally no molecules or atoms to interact with. So therefore, we generally refer this vacuum as also the permittivity of free space, because we ideally assume for all numerical and practical purposes that there are no charges in between these two interfering or interacting point charges. Got it? So therefore, what will happen? The force gets drastically reduced. The Coulombian force of repulsion in this case gets drastically reduced. Force decreases. Why does it decrease? There is an ability for these loaded atoms with charged particles, they tend to reduce the force. Now this, why do they do it? Why does it happen to this particular medium? Because it's a characteristic of that medium. What do you mean by characteristic of that medium? When I say characteristic of the medium, because that medium is made up of a certain kind of atoms, right? It has got certain kind of charge. There could be valence electrons, there could be charged particles, charged atoms, right? There are charged particles in between. So that is the characteristic of that particular medium. So if there are more number of charged particles in between and Q1 and Q2, obviously Q1 will end up spending some of its force in interacting with these before it gets to interact with Q2, because these charged atoms or charged particles are in the space are before Q2. Even before it gets to interact with Q2, it will end up sensing these charged particles. So some of its force do get reduced or does get reduced in interacting with these loaded nuclei with charged particles, right? So how do we define Coulombian force of repulsion? Here it is the same way, but what is the change that we are going to make? There's no difference about 1/4 pi, but instead of writing it as epsilon naught, where it is the ability of a free space to reduce the force between any two charges, we define it as epsilon m. This we call it as epsilon. How do you read it? Epsilon. This is how it is read. Epsilon m. Epsilon m is nothing but permittivity of that particular medium. What is the medium here? It is the medium water. So you can also write epsilon H2O, meaning water, into Q1, Q2, that is the product of the magnitude of the two charges, divided by inversely proportional to the distance of separation between them, and acting along the line joining the two charges. Here you can see, why am I not stating it mathematically? Because I am in all these cases, I have only referred or written only the magnitude of f. We have not come to a point where I am writing it in a vector notation as such. I have done it in my previous session. You can always go back and watch it. But nonetheless, I am going to also do it in this session for more clarity. I'll do it a bit more, so it becomes really clear even before I start dealing with electric field lines, flux, potential, and also start solving numericals. So I think these fundamentals have to be registered really well, otherwise it starts getting tougher and tougher, and every time you'll have to come back. There's nothing wrong coming back, watching the videos, learning them back and again, refreshing your memory, writing them down in a certain way, so that you remember. So numericals start feeling really easy. Okay, so 1 by 4 pi epsilon m q1 q2 by r square. Right, so now if epsilon m, imagine if I knew the value, if it was 80, okay, now epsilon naught for all practical purposes is approximately 1. Okay, so if this is 1, it does not really alter the force much, whereas if you have a larger number than 1, if it was 80 for water, then what will happen to the force? Obviously, it will be reduced 80 times, 1 by 80 times of the force. If you find f to be something, so what will happen to this f dash, the force in this medium water, f dash will be 1 by 80 times of this force, because it was here almost 1. So therefore you see that the force between the two charges do get drastically reduced because of the presence of other atoms and molecules, and that ability of that medium, because it has its own characteristic. Why does that get that characteristic? Because it is loaded with its own atoms and molecules, which has charged particles in it, and they do get to interact with the first charge even before it starts getting interacted with another point charge, and hence we define that property as the permittivity, which has the ability to reduce the force or also influence the force of one charge before it gets to interact with the other. Okay. So now it's time to define a term called relative permittivity or relative permittivity as we refer in physics. Why do we need this term? This term is really crucial because we know the permittivity of something in permittivity of free space or in vacuum, but you might not be able to remember the permittivity of a lot of other medium like water, glass, plastic, wood. They could be placed in any medium. It ideally becomes really difficult to remember a lot of numbers. So we generally define a term called relative permittivity, and you do get a lot of numericals or MCQs in your board exams as well as your entrance exam. So how do we define this? Imagine two charges Q1 and Q2. When I say charges, I definitely mean point charges. So I stress on the term point charges. I again repeat point charges because this distance of separation r is very much greater in magnitude compared to the magnitude of the charges themselves, right? So Q1 and Q2 separated in vacuum. How do you define the Coulombian force of attraction or repulsion? It is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by r square, acting along the line joining the two charges. I specified again and again because I'm not writing it as a vector here, but as such I'm stating it as a Coulombian force of law of repulsion in this case. Right, now when I place it in a medium like water, what does it happen? Now the same charge is kept in a different medium. I do not mention what medium it is, but there is certainly another medium other than vacuums, which means there are interacting particles in between. So let's call this new force as F dash is equal to 1 by 4 pi. Instead of epsilon naught, where this is void or vacuum, I refer to it as permittivity of the medium, Q1 Q2 divided by r square. So how do you define this relative permittivity? Relative permittivity is denoted as epsilon r, where r refers to relative permittivity. It is force between any two charges placed in vacuum. force between any 2 point charges, I write it in short, placed in vacuum to the same force between the 2 point charges placed in a medium, right? So let's write. So what are the expression? This is the expression. So it will be basically F divided by F dash. So F divided by F dash is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by R square whole divided by 1 by 4 pi epsilon m Q1 Q2 divided by R square. Now this comes to the numerator. When you have two terms like this goes to the numerator and this comes, and when you cross multiply, if you are capable of doing it as such, you can do it. If not, some who may have difficulty solving, who might not know how to do it, I'll do it this way, 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. Okay, let me write this Q1 Q2 divided by R square into, this goes to the numerator, so this will be 4 pi epsilon m R square divided by Q1 Q2, where 4 pi R square Q1 Q2 gets cancelled. So what do you have in the numerator? You have permittivity of the medium divided by permittivity in free space. So what is relative permittivity? Relative permittivity is basically permittivity of the medium divided by permittivity of free space. In other terms, permittivity of any medium can be numerically found out if you know their permittivity in vacuum multiplied by the relative permittivity. These are useful for numerical and MCQ purposes. So these are formulas that you have to remember. In case you do not remember, you can always derive it on spot. If you remember, relative permittivity is the comparison of the force between any 2 point charges placed in vacuum to that of the force between those same point 2 charges placed at the same distance in any given medium. So vacuum to medium. But what happens, it gets reversed, because when you do mathematics, this comes to the numerator, it goes to the denominator. So relative permittivity is permittivity of the medium with respect to permittivity in free space. Okay, I hope this part is clear. Now what we'll do is, we'll talk about, I've already spoken about vectors, how to write, Coulombian law and vector notation, but I'll elaborate it today. For all purposes, so that when we do numericals, we don't want to have any confusion. You can always refer back to this. I mean, even in numericals, I'll always revisit, I'll always explain you in detail, so that it really becomes easy and it, physics starts feeling less scary and you get the guts to solve the problem. So the time has come where, you're trying to write the Coulombian force of attraction or repulsion in its vector form. We have done it in the previous session. We'll do it again more elaborately. Let's get started. So, force as such, if you have to write it in the vector form, it is obviously 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by R square. All of this is magnitude. 4 pi epsilon naught is also the magnitude part of the force. Product of the magnitude of the forces is a magnitude part, and R square is also the magnitude part. Although you can also write it as direction, which I will show you now. So how do you say, we already spoke about something called a unit vector. So unit vector is, you just write it as R cap. So R cap, as you know, it can be written as what? Vector R. R cap is a basic unit vector which might have its directions in the x coordinate, y coordinate and the z coordinate. It's a unit vector. The value doesn't really alter. It only says that it is pointing in the unit vector direction. Now, this vector, unit vector, is generally written as R cap is the vector itself divided by its magnitude, right? Now, I'll show you a vector. Let's take this example. Let's take a coordinate axis. Okay, let's take a point. You can take the same point Q1 and Q2. So if you have to define where they are placed, you draw two lines. So you can call this as R1 vector, this as R2 vector, right? Vector R1 and vector R2. Now, with respect to this, this is the z-axis, this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis. The unit vector in this direction is I cap. The unit vector in this direction is k cap. The unit vector in this direction is j cap. So along the x-axis we call the unit vector to be I cap. Along z direction you call it to be k cap. Along the y direction you call it to be j cap. So what will be vector r1? Vector r1 will be some value of x along the x-axis. It will have some value of x, right? So this will have some value of x, y and z. This will also have some value of x, y and z. So these are only the magnitude part. But if you have to tell the direction, you have to write a unit vector in that direction. So x, value of x into the unit vector plus value of y into its unit vector plus value of z into its unit vector. Similarly, vector r2 will also be, you can call this as x1, y1 and z1 because they are different values. So this will be x2 I cap, y2 j cap plus z2 k cap, right? So this is how you write a unit vector. Now this can also be mathematically written as unit vector is equal to, let's write the vector. R1 will be x I cap plus y j cap plus z k cap whole divided by, how do you find the magnitude of a given vector? The magnitude of the given vector is square root of squares of algebraic sum of these values. So x square plus the algebraic sum of y square plus the algebraic sum of z square. So this is how you basically find the unit vector. So this will be elaborately taught to you in a chapter called Scalars and Vectors, but it is essential now that you are in class 12. You must know what we are doing, why we are writing in a certain way, how to combine your concepts of class 11 into class 12 to better understand the numericals, to better understand what we are really referring to, why am I writing it as r vector, why am I writing it as a unit vector, what unit vector can be written as, and what does it actually mean. So all this has to be crystal clear for you to approach any numerical in physics. Okay, now let's write r cap to be vector r divided by the magnitude of vector r. So force vector will be equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 divided by r square, which into r cap, r can be written as vector r divided by magnitude of the vector r. So this can again be written as, this is obviously some value. So 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 to q2 divided by r square into vector r. This can also be simply written as magnitude and vector is nothing but r, because you get some words. Magnitude of r is you just get some value, the vector sign gets removed, right? So 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 into vector r divided by, it is r to the power 2, r to the power 1. If the bases are same, you add the power, so it is 2 plus 1. This ultimately in the full vector form can be written as 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 divided by r cube into the whole vector r. So this is another form of writing it in the whole vector notation instead of writing it in just the unit vector form. This can also be one of your MCQs where they might ask you to write it in the full vector notation. So this is full vector notation. This is where you are expressing it in only in terms of unit vector. Again, vector r is nothing but what? Vector r can be written as, this implies vector r, you cross multiply this. Vector r is equal to unit vector multiplied by the magnitude of the vector. So all these things you must be aware, because there can be n number of numericals and questions that you can form on your own and start solving and start enjoying it. Once you understand all this, once all of these concepts become crystal clear, as I said, more and more you practice, try understanding it, watch repeatedly what I've said, ask questions whenever needed, then numericals become really easy. Okay, so before I end today's session, there is one more concept I want you to have a crystal clear information so that it becomes really easy to use your notations. If your notations are wrong, then you are allowed, or you're certainly expected to use the notations in a certain way. They are universally used, so it is essential that you learn to use it in a certain way and practice it. Make it a habit to write it in a certain way. Make it a habit to write the vector arrow on head whenever you are referring to a vector, or whenever it's essential that if you are finding a vector in a numerical, you write the magnitude and also specify in what direction is that particular vector heading, or facing, whatever it is. So it is essential. So this concept also, I just want to end the class by explaining this part, and then we'll meet you in the next session with a new concept. Yes, so what is that I want you to understand is, see, we learned any 2 point charges Q1 and Q2. They were separated by a certain distance, right? Now they were separated. Generally we only refer to this distance of separation as r, right? Now it also, if assuming these two are positive charges, obviously there is going to be a force of repulsion. So what is the force experienced by Q2 on Q1? Is it just F, or do you have to use some other notation? And where does it point? Since these two are positive charges, like one of the properties of charges do say that like charges do repel, so it has to repel. So when I say repel, obviously it will not point towards Q1, it has to point away from Q1. But then I cannot simply write it as F, right? Also Q1 will also experience an equal and opposite force due to Q2, so it will also move away from Q1. I mean, it experiences a force, although there might be assumed there is no displacement, because you see in general there has already been a displacement that implies to both of them, right? So I can't simply write F and F. They're obviously equal and opposite, but then there is a certain notation that you must follow in order to distinguish the forces. So I need to know which force am I really talking about. So here I am talking about the force experienced by 2 due to 1. So you do not write the force, you do write the number of the charge that is experiencing the force first, and then the number of the charge which is exerting that force. So it is the experience and then the exertion. So the force experienced by 2 due to 1, and here it is the force experienced by 1 due to what charge? Due to 2. So this becomes F12 and this becomes F21. Also, if I mean, what is if this vector will be referred to as distance of 2 from 1. If you are referring in this direction, this will be referred to as distance of 1 from 2. So that is how you refer vectors. This is vector notations. Let's take another example. If there is Q1 here, Q2 somewhere here, Q3 somewhere here, okay, let's all join them and call these distances as R1, let this is R2, and let this be R3. Now imagine this is plus, this is minus, okay. So this force exerted, what will this force be? It repels in this direction because both of them are positively charged. Obviously they are going to repel away from each other. It is going to move away from the direction of Q1. So this force is force experienced by 2 due to what? Due to 1. Similarly, this charge 2 will also experience some force due to Q3, which is there in the vicinity, placed at a distance R2. So how do you refer? This is minus and this is plus. They are certainly going to attract. So this gets attracted in the direction of Q3. So what is this force called? This is the force on 2 due to 3, right? Similarly, this also experiences a force due to Q2. So this force will be force experienced by 3 due to 2. Right, due to this charge, and this will experience a force due to this. Both are plus and minus. This gets attracted here. So this is the force on 3 due to 1. Similarly, what are the forces experienced by Q1? All of them are vectors. Make sure you write the vector head. Right. So force experienced by Q1 due to Q3 is again attractive because it's positive and negative. Opposite forces attract. Opposite charges attract, so therefore this will be in this direction. So this is the force experienced by 1, charge 1 due to what? Due to 3. Similarly, these repel each other, right? It moves in this direction because they are positively charged. force experienced by one due to what charge? Due to charge number 2. So this is how you write your notations. This is how you find out, these notations have to be really clear. Always write the charge number that is experiencing the force first, and then the charge which is exerting that number of the charge which is exerting that force. So this is the charge experiencing the force. This is the charge number which is exerting that force on that charge. So I hope this notation part is clear, because it's very crucial when you have to solve a lot of numericals. So I think these fundamentals have to be crystal clear before you take up any numerical, so that we don't really have to come back to these concepts back and forth. But I will really do, because I enjoy doing this. I mean, numericals, when you solve, you really need to enjoy as a physics student, and then concepts have to be crystal clear. You can't just vaguely remember things. It is essential that you understand the fundamentals really well. And yes, we'll meet in another class. Please like and subscribe the video, so that I can make and please comment below if you have any questions, if you want me to do more videos on a particular topic. I'm going in a sequential order, so I'll keep posting. Yes, so then take care of physics and electrostatics and their fundamentals. Certainly, as I always say, it is going to take care of you. For now, see you. I'll come back with a new lesson on a new topic called the electric field. We are going to discuss a new concept for field lines and stuff. Till then, see you. Take care.